Minister, this particular bill, as presently drafted, is anti-climate, anti-democratic, anti-Irish and anti-poor. Now, don't get me wrong, climate change must be addressed, and I believe we do need a new climate law to make it happen here in Ireland, both in urban areas and rural areas. As Ireland's first Climate Minister, I did not have the legal tools available to me to bring about the type of sustainable change that was needed. For example, after a long, protracted battle, I secured a Cabinet decision in January 2018 not to purchase any new fossil fuel buses for public transport. Disappointingly, the very first double-decker electric vehicle will not be on the streets of this city here in Dublin until January 2023, a full 5 years after I secured that commitment. In fact, I envy you, Minister, in the way that you can actually push things along. But in the rush to get things done, our economy and our rural economy are being needlessly sacrificed when there are alternative approaches which should be taken to achieve the same goal. While the Climate Bill provides the framework for the delivery, it does not provide the mechanism to achieve it. As presently constituted, it will decimate our economy, and our rural economy in particular, and do little in return to achieve our global goal of reducing emissions. That is because my big fear is that the primary focus will not change. The focus will remain on upfront costs, which is an incentive to do little and leave it all to agriculture, with the easy option being an overall reduction in the national herd, which ultimately could be anti-climate. The current system of calculating climate emissions discriminates against a food exporter such as Ireland. Even though 90% of our beef is exported, Ireland is penalised for being the most carbon-efficient beef exporter within the European Union because the rules state that responsibility is on the producer rather than the consumer. So relatively carbon-efficient beef production in Ireland can therefore be replaced throughout the Union with beef that is 35 times worse from an environmental perspective coming from the Amazon basin. And that's okay, according to the climate mathematicians, but not our atmosphere. Unless we completely change the approach to calculating agricultural emissions, then we will decimate an industry here in Ireland, while also destroying our atmosphere for generations to come. This is a lose-lose situation unless we look again at the maths behind the climate targets. And this bill is anti-democratic. This bill, if enacted, will legislate Dáil Éireann out of existence on all climate-related matters. This is undemocratic and must be opposed outright. Section 9 of this bill states that the carbon budget for the following 5 years is to be laid before Dáil Éireann for approval. But TDs have no ability to amend or alter the proposals. And if Dáil Éireann rejects the 5-year carbon budget, then the Minister will, within 60 days, bring in his or her own 5-year carbon budget without any need to consult or seek the approval of the Dáil. Furthermore, Dáil Éireann has absolutely no role or input into the individual 5-year sectoral emission caps for agriculture, transport, home heating, etc. Minister, this is akin to a law being passed that the Minister for Finance can present a full 5-year taxation budget to the Dáil without any detail of how the Minister intends to spend that money that he's collected. And if the Dáil rejects it, the Government can bring in any taxation measure it likes within 60 days and the Dáil has no say whatsoever. And on top of that, the Minister for Finance decides how much funding is to be allocated to each government department for the following 5 years, and TDs have no role in considering it, whether it's appropriate or not. Minister, they didn't even go to that extreme in Stalinist Russia. This bill is also anti-Irish because the climate rule book has been developed by industrialised countries. So the tools that are being used by our EU colleagues to address the climate problem are based on the bulk of emissions coming from industry, cities and intensive agriculture. In Ireland, 37% of our population live in rural areas. We have just 2 cities over 100,000 population, namely Dublin and Cork. So whichever way you look at it, our climate challenges in Ireland are all about land use, and dispersed land use in particular. Extensive agricultural practices, isolated rural communities reliant on cars, a large number of small towns, the disproportionate scale of Dublin to the rest of the country. Minister, I could go on. Our climate challenges are the polar opposites of our European colleagues, yet the EU climate rules are designed to address EU challenges and not Irish challenges. This inbuilt industrialised country bias is everywhere, from the environmental zealots who shoot down any alternative approach, right through to the Climate Change Advisory Council, which now, under this law, is going to set our domestic climate targets. Minister, this new bill wants to enshrine this particular EU bias and Irish climate bias into law, and that's why this bill is anti-Irish. This bill is also anti-poor. As a result of the pandemic, families' heating bills have gone up dramatically, compounded by the increase in carbon taxes, but not just because people are spending more time at home. It is because families who are struggling to pay their electricity bills are subsidising the supply of electricity into data centres operated by multinational, multi-billion euro companies, and the level of subsidy is set to increase dramatically with our ambitious renewable energy targets. It is immoral that people who are struggling to pay their electricity bills are subsidising the cost of electricity going into data centres, many of which have been constructed on a speculative basis. I argued vehemently against this approach at Cabinet, and this is reflected in the government policy statement issued in 2018 on data centres. However, this particular element of the commitment in that policy statement has yet to be implemented. We need data centres to pay for their own costs in terms of electricity infrastructure that is being put in place to meet their growing energy demands, and in terms of the generation of green electricity. This cost should never be put on the backs of struggling families across this country. And while there is reference made in the bill to protect the attractiveness of the state for investment, which is commendable, however, there is no mention of fuel poverty anywhere in the bill. In this bill, families are forgotten. And it's not the only place that families have been forgotten. As you know, Minister, there are approximately 7,000 families who are reliant on social welfare, awaiting for approval for their homes under the retrofit scheme, under the Warmer Home Scheme. And disappointingly, you, Minister, have stated that there are changes coming to the scheme, and to quote you, to better target those most in need. In other words, Minister, quite a number of those 7,000 people who are in energy poverty, who are reliant on social welfare, will now be excluded as a result of this revision, and that is wrong. So, while we've seen a 9% increase in residential emissions during the 2020 lockdown, we've also seen a dramatic fall-off in the retrofitting of homes, which commenced in 2019 and collapsed in 2020. Over the last 2.5 years, we have failed to meet the targets that have been set in relation to deep retrofitting homes, and sadly, if we continue to fail to achieve that, I'm afraid that the agricultural sector will be the one that will be left carrying the can. Thank you.